Alright everyone, welcome to a brand new season of By the Box. We're kicking off Season 2 with the 5Ds era, Stardust Acceleration, and Power of Bravery. So as far as categories go, I have changed them from the Season 1 categories to be a lot more simple. So this time it's just going to be A, B, and C tier for ranking cards, but I will still talk about honorable mentions and the poster boy and all that good stuff from before. Now the criteria of how cards are going into these categories looks a little bit like this. So A tier is reserved for cards that are good in meta decks or are detrimental essential parts of rogue decks. The B tier is reserved for cards that are great in rogue decks or are very minor contributors to meta decks or they occasionally see play in meta decks, etc. And the C tier is for cards that are decent to good in rogue decks or cards that I see a ton of potential in. Now as staples work with these categories, they don't quite fit this criteria, so staples are going to be ranked A, B, or C depending on play percentage and power level because that's going to be the best way to rank them. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump straight into Stardust Acceleration. So for the newly founded A tier, there is nothing in Stardust Acceleration that quite fits that, so we're going to jump straight into B tier, and I have one card in it, and that is the quick play spell card, Offerings to the Doomed. Okay, boy. Offerings to the Doomed is very simple. Target a face-up monster on the field, you destroy that target, and then you skip your next draw phase. And if that downside seems pretty hefty, that's because it is. This is actually a beautifully balanced card. Because the upside of skipping your draw phase is one of the best quick effect utility plays in Duel Links. We have learned from cards like Abyss Dweller from the past that quick effect destructions are really good, and we are currently learning from Volofernagus in Odd-Eyes decks just how good quick effect destructions are. And Offerings to the Doomed isn't an extra deck monster. It doesn't need a bunch of setup. It isn't restricted in what decks it can play. It just has a really nasty downside. But the versatility and power of the card should not be understated. Just like Volofernagus, just destroying your opponent's combo starter or their boss monster or maybe one of their Exceed or Synchro materials so they can't go into their plays, this card is so useful against your opponent, but then on your turn it has even more utility. You could keep it in your hand for the battle phase to blow up an opponent's monster as you're trying to navigate your way around hand traps maybe, or blow up an opponent's Cyber Slash or even their Volofernagus. And that's what this card screams, is I am confident in this effect putting me in a position to win the game, so much so that I am going to give up my next draw phase. I am content with everything I have on the field and in the graveyard and in my hand right now. And for that, it doesn't see the widespread play it would if it had a lesser downside, but it's still seen a ton of play and still sees play more than you would think. At some point in the past, I also used this card in Blackwings, and the fact that it still pops in as a staple that's being run at 1 or 2 copies is kind of fascinating to me, but also speaks to how good a quick effect destruction is. And the main reason I'm putting it in B tier and not C tier is because of how recently impressive the card has been, namely being in a top 100 global Witchcrafter deck in the KC Cup. Offerings to the Doomed is available in one other way in Selection Box Mini Volume 1. So continuing through Stardust Acceleration, we move down to the C tier, and to start there, I have Genex Undine, the first ultra rare we're going to talk about. Genex Undine is a level 3 water aqua monster. When he's normal summoned, you can send any water monster from your deck to the graveyard to add a Genex controller from your deck to your hand. Genex controller would be this vanilla little boy down here. It's a level 3 tuner monster that is kind of the center of the Genex archetype, but the reason Genex Undine is so good is not because it's a Genex controller searcher, but because it can put any water monster in the graveyard. Genex controller is actually a garnet. If you don't know what garnet is, it's a term for cards that you want to stay in your deck. If you open them in your opening hand, it's part of maybe one of the brickiest hands that you could have. And that's kind of the thing. Genex Undine cannot send a water monster from the deck to the graveyard if you don't have a Genex controller in your deck. So then what's the point here? Well, these two cards make up the Undine engine, and it's what you might expect. The Undine engine can be thrown into any water deck where they want water monsters in the graveyard. So then your normal summon of Genex Undine will put a resource in your graveyard immediately, and then you get to search the Genex controller, which you could maybe use for a rank 3 with Undine, maybe a level 6 synchro, what have you, but the point is you're getting it out of the deck and you're thinning it, and then you're setting up the plays in the graveyard. It's similar to the Neos Fusion engine, just nowhere near as good, and it saw a ton of success in Crystons until Crystons were heavily nerfed, and part of that nerf to Crystons included limiting Genex controller to 2, effectively crippling this engine even more, and that's why Genex Undine is in C tier, because I don't think the power of the card and the utility has significantly gone down through power creep. It's really just being held back by a restriction right now, something that I could see changing, especially with better water monsters coming to the game that you would want in the graveyard. Undine is kind of one of these evergreen cards, where so long as there are good water monsters that want to be in the graveyard, then this card can fit somewhere. Genex Undine is only available in one other way, and that is in Selection Box Volume 3. Continuing in C tier, we have the super rare synchro monster, limited to 1, the legendary Azure-Eyes Silver Dragon, baby. Azure-Eyes Silver Dragon is a level 9 dragon synchro monster. Can take any tuner, but his non-tuners have to be normal monsters. When he special summon, dragon type monsters you control cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects until the next turn. Then he has this effect during your standby phase where you can target a normal monster in your graveyard and then special summon it. At a certain point when Blue Eyes was tier 1, Azure-Eyes Silver Dragon was debatably the best boss monster in the game. You see, it pairs very well with Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, another level 9 synchro monster that is extremely easy for Blue Eyes decks to go into. And Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, on a quick effect, can special summon Azure-Eyes Silver Dragon from the extra deck just like that. And the way it was used in the past was to wait for your opponent to make an all-in play to destroy one of your monsters or to pay out their combos, and the second they do that, you would tribute your Spirit Dragon, summon Azure-Eyes, and then Azure-Eyes can't be targeted or destroyed, and neither can any of your other dragon monsters. It essentially bought you a free turn and would get your opponent to waste all their resources. With 3000 defense as well, it was a very stubborn card. And then one day, Konami decided to limit it to 1, and so now Azure-Eyes is limited to 1 alongside 2 other cards that see play in Blue Eyes, Melody of Awakening Dragon as well as Monster Reborn. And Blue Eyes decks are kind of torn between picking which of the 3 they actually want to run. And a good amount of them, a certainly fair amount of them, do opt to run Azure-Eyes just because he is that good of a boss monster. But another thing that made Azure-Eyes so good in the past in those Blue Eyes decks was their access to Melody of Awakening Dragon as well. So the deck's restrictions as well as some power creep that has hit this deck has lowered Azure-Eyes down to the C tier here. However, it definitely deserves notoriety as a very good boss monster. But with all of that being said, this is not the best way to get this card. If you're trying to build Blue Eyes, then Azure-Eyes Silver Dragon is available in the Blue Eyes Evolution structure deck, which has many other good Blue Eyes cards, so that is the way to go get this card, not Stardust Acceleration. Continuing in the C tier, we have another ultra rare to go over, and that is the normal spell card, Unexpected Die. Another very simple card. It has the effect that if you control no monsters, you can special summon a level 4 lower normal monster from your deck. Unexpected Die is an interesting card because having it in your deck effectively is just a special summoned level 4 lower normal monster. So it's essentially another monster that you're running in your deck that you can special summon just like that. So any deck that's trying to special summon level 4 lower normal monsters is going to have better consistency just because Unexpected Die exists. So with the context of the card right there, it's obviously very good. However, that just goes to show how kind of not good those targets are. Level 4 lower normal monsters is extremely niche. And you can make the argument that this card has been power crept by Rescue Rabbit, but they do facilitate different things quite a bit. So that's not an argument that I would try to make, but more that just Unexpected Die has never been crucial to any deck that can fit this criteria, not even Metalfoes, which Metalfoes has been using this card on occasion as of late, but it's typically seeing play at 1 copy, and it is the minority of Metalfoes decks because they are preferring to run Summoner's Art. But still, a free special summon from the deck is so good. Like Rescue Rabbit, this card can facilitate an instant rank 4 if you wanted. Use Unexpected Die to summon the monster from your deck, and then normal summon 1 from your hand, and boom, there you go, you got an Exceed monster. But the sheer situational aspect of the card is going to keep it down in C tier, because if you were to pull this card from this box, it's more unlikely than likely that you have a deck that this card's going to work with. And there is a better way to get this card than Stardust Acceleration. It is also available in the Gladiator Storm EX structure deck, which is the way I would recommend going after this card. So I really just have one honorable mention, and it's very close to the C tier for kind of the same reasons as Unexpected Die, and that is Dark Factory of Mass Production. Dark Factory is a normal spell that can target 2 normal monsters in your graveyard and then add them to your hand. This is also seeing play in the aforementioned Metalfoes, but once again, it's less often than more, and it also sees niche play in Exodia decks to recycle the Exodia pieces back to the hand, which of course is very fun. Its play percentage in Metalfoes as a straight recursion card seems to be climbing, so this card is very close to the category, so it's definitely a very strong honorable mention for Stardust Acceleration. And now, the poster boy, one of my favorite cards of all time, Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon is a level 8 Wind Dragon synchro monster with completely generic materials. Has the effect that during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated on the field that would destroy a card or multiple cards on the field, you contribute it to negate the activation and destroy it. And then, during the end phase, Stardust Dragon will special summon itself from the graveyard, assuming the effect did successfully resolve. In my heyday of the TCG, this card was so good when it first came out because destruction was kind of the only way to get rid of cards, and Stardust Dragon acted as this big counter to everything that could just revive itself during the end phase. It basically gave you a guarantee to negate a destruction effect every single turn. And with that being said, Stardust Dragon is certainly a decent card to this day. The problem is it just doesn't do much on the field, and you can't really do anything with it to get its effect to resolve to affect your opponent in some type of way. All you are doing is putting this obstacle in front of your opponent and telling them, hey, play around this. And this day and age in Duel Links, it's really not hard to play around Stardust Dragon. I mean, one Book of Moon and it's done, one Karma Cut and it's done. However, the card does see play in its own Shooting Star deck, which at this point has been power crept so hard and is so reliant on its skill that to call it a rogue deck is kind of a far cry. And then another problem with that is Stardust Dragon doesn't do anything in that deck. It's literally just a material to go into Shooting Star Dragon. And I should mention this real quick with Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon actually is seeing meta play in Buster Blader at 1 copy in the extra deck, which is something I only found out after I made the recording, of course. However, I cannot for the life of me figure out why. I've not been able to find a replay of a Buster Blader deck summoning this card. I've never been able to find a player talk about running Stardust Dragon and Buster Blader, so I have no idea why. Obviously, they go into level 8 synchro monsters very easily, so all I can imagine is that it's a toolbox option to help protect your boss monster. And you can make the argument that that would make it a minor contributor to a meta deck, which would put it in B tier, but so long as I don't really know what it's doing in Buster Blader, I don't feel comfortable ranking it. I don't really feel comfortable making an errata to my categories here, so I just wanted to mention that with Stardust Dragon, especially because we are going to be going over some Buster Blader cards. Right, Power of Bravery, which I only have 7 packs of left and still can't pull fucking Mortronic Self on. So jumping into my categories for Power of Bravery, I only have 2 cards to talk about from this box, and the first one is in A tier, and I'm sure you're all already looking at it, and that is Buster Whelp of the Destruction Swordsman. Talked about this card quite a few times in my channel's history because it's always been pretty good, and as of right now, it is one of the best meta combo pieces there is. When he's normal summoned, you can add any Destruction Sword card from your deck to your hand except another copy of himself, and you can only use one of his effects once per turn and only once that turn. So 2 effects, hard once per turn, shared between both of them. The first one is you contribute him to special summon a Buster Blader from your hand or graveyard, and if it's in your graveyard and you control Buster Blader, you can discard 1 Destruction Sword card and special summon it. And like I mentioned, going over Stardust Dragon, Buster Blader is very good at going into level 8 synchro monsters because the Buster Blader cards are level 7 generic monsters, whereas Buster Whelp is a level 1 tuner. And more often than not, they are going into Buster Dragon, which turns all of your opponent's monsters into Dragon type, and then that effect of Buster Dragon will then give their boss monster, Buster Blader the Dragon Destruction Swordsman, or BBDDS as I like to call him. He'll gain 1000 attack for every dragon monster your opponent controls, he'll change all of them to defense mode, and he will negate all of their effects, and he also inflicts piercing battle damage. And that's Buster Blader Blader's whole bread and butter right there. And none of it would be possible without Buster Whelp, who can directly search out the fusion spell cards, can directly special summon the other synchro materials, can special summon itself. The card does almost everything for the deck. So to say that it's an integral or detrimental part of a meta deck is a complete understatement. Buster Whelp is so good. And moving down to B tier, that's where we're going to talk about the other Buster Blader card in this box, and that is the quick play fusion spell card Destruction Swordsman Fusion, which does about what you would expect it to do. Fusion summons a fusion monster that has Buster Blader as a material, using materials from your field or hand. And then if it's in your graveyard, you can send a card from your hand to the graveyard to add it back to your hand, so it has its own built-in recursion. Hard once per turn on both of its effects, but it also being a quick play adds even more versatility to the deck, as they are capable of pulling off this BBDDS Buster Dragon combo on their opponent's turn. Typically it's seeing play at one copy right now because there are other good Buster Blader fusion spell cards that have entered the game, but to take away from this card is also quite foolish. It's very good. Now for Buster Whelp, it's only available in one other way, and that is Selection Box Volume 5, and the same goes for Destruction Swordsman Fusion. And how much that contributes to the value of the box I will get to once I'm done with everything in it, but that is something that if you're thinking about building Buster Blader, I would stay tuned for. So going over the poster boy, we have Power Tool Dragon. He is a generic level 7 synchro monster. Machine type Earth attribute generic materials. Once per turn, you can reveal 3 equip spells from your deck, and then your opponent randomly adds one of them to your hand, and the rest of them get shuffled back into the deck. And if he were to be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send one of the equipped spells to the graveyard instead. Comparatively to other poster boys I've talked about, Power Tool Dragon really ain't all that bad, but his biggest claim to fame is just being an equip spell searcher, a very unreliable one at that. You could even make the argument that the trap card Armory Call has power crept Power Tool Dragon, and it hasn't seen play since late 2020 when it was seeing play in some Karakuri decks. And as far as potential goes, I think it just kind of goes down for Power Tool Dragon because we're only going to get better equip spell searchers, and then the utility nature of Power Tool Dragon becomes just kind of useless. But all things considered, he's really not a bad card. Level 7 synchro is pretty easy to go into, and you can instantly get an equip spell for him that will also help him prevent destruction. But the utility nature of that card, fitting it into a 7-slot extra deck, it's just not gonna happen. And as far as anything else to talk about in this box, I really just want to talk about the spell card Desynchro, which as you can see is limited to 1. Desynchro does what you would kind of expect, where you target a synchro monster on the field and return it to the extra deck, and if all of its materials are in the graveyard, then you special summon them. So the biggest issue with Desynchro, of course, is its ability to recycle effects. So if your synchro monster has a really good effect when it hits the field, and then you can desynchro and then use that effect again, it creates problems. And that's why the card is limited to 1, to lower the consistency of any combo that would make use of desynchro shenanigans. But it can really accomplish a whole bunch of things: deck out potential, burn potential, OTK potential, FTK potential. The card is actually pretty insane. But while limited to 1, it doesn't really make a peep, so it just kind of sits in this box limited to 1, seeing the occasional very rare niche play in some kind of gimmick deck, and for that reason I actually kind of like the card. So as far as the value of Power of Bravery for the Buster Blader cards, I do think it's worth it, because Buster Blader is very strong right now, but it's also one of those decks that is very strong right now, but it's in a good position where it's not too strong that an inevitable nerf is coming from the deck. It's also a very popular deck. A lot of people like Buster Blader, and I totally see why. And it being a mini box and it having the super rare spell card in it that you'll need as well is quite nice. And going over some of the other things that, while they're not, you know, all that great, I mean, there's a bunch of scrap cards in here, a bunch of Morphtronic cards. So while you can make some decks that aren't even rogue, you can still make some other decks that you can maybe have fun with, like Morphtronics. So all things considered, I actually don't think this box is all that terrible. And if you're really going for Buster Blader, then it's really not a horrible one to go through. That's the reason I'm down to 7 packs, and then for some reason I just really want this fucking cell phone, so I won't give up on it. And that's gonna do it for By the Box Season 2 Episode 1. We are back, baby, and I am so excited about it. Thank you guys for your patience on this video, and I will see you in my next one.